I think you have the best of both worlds here, where you have the threat of the retaliatory tax itself leading up for an opportunity to reset negotiations with the Europeans and the OECD countries on a deal here, a deal struck by the Trump administration, not the Biden administration. And I love your point about not letting the Europeans tax us was a pretty foundational part of our country. I don't know why the Biden administration was voluntarily putting us in agreement where our tax policy could be dictated by Paris and Brussels.
Hey, this is Grover Norquist. So welcome to Leave Us Alone, the podcast that champions individual freedom and limited government. I'm here today to talk about Big, Beautiful Bill. And not sure if it's going to get bigger or smaller between now and when it gets ultimately passed in the next minutes, days, weeks. But Big, Beautiful Bill, if you are new here, the show is about one simple idea. Government should always stay out of our lives. The coalition includes everybody who basically on the vote moving issue wishes to be left alone. Taxpayers, property owners, homeschoolers, gun owners, people who care about religious liberty, people who want the government to back off and let us lead our lives. So I am here with Mike. Mike, can you get us started? Where do we stand today as we speak on Friday morning? And July 4th is coming up as the deadline when it has to pass the House, the Senate, and the president will put it in front of the little device that signs his name for him.
Well, it seems like we are inching closer and closer to the Senate passing its bill. So to remind folks, we do have the House passed one big, beautiful bill, and now we need the Senate to pass their version to send it back to the House and to get it to the president's desk. So I think we are we're in the red zone here. Grover, that's a football reference, meaning we're about to score. But
what's red?
It means you're on the 20-yard line near the end zone.
Okay. Yeah.
Within the 20-yard line. So where we have right now a couple of key decisions still being made, but there are deals being made in real time as we record here. The latest of which came last night, where we had news that the Section 899 international tax provisions, known as the retaliatory tax, is seemingly out of the bill, given that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is announcing that they are close to a deal with some of the European countries in the OECD. This gets a little in the weeds here, Grover, but two of the main provisions we've talked about before are the OECD Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 tax provisions. Pillar 1 essentially targeting a lot of American tech companies, and Pillar 2 establishing the global minimum tax. Maybe we can start there with the global minimum tax, Grover.
And these are things that Biden agreed to. No vote in Congress, but it was sort of like when Obama decided that he approved the Paris Accords, which were supposed to lock us into having no energy, the way Europe has decided not to have any energy and commit suicide. This was trying to lock the United States into agreeing to a minimum corporate income tax that we would never go below. So we couldn't compete with Europe on lower taxes. We'd have to compete on lower wages. Why would we want to do that? That's too stupid for words. But that's what Biden did. So that's Pillar 2. Pillar 1, because we don't want to do that. We're not going to do that. We're not in, and we're not going to allow you to, quote unquote, force us into it. Pillar 1 is where they decide they can tax our high-tech companies. And they've decided, among other things, you have to be so big. Only the American companies are that big to be hit by it. And they tax income, which we don't recognize as being made in Europe, but rather elsewhere. So they shouldn't be taxing it at all. And Biden did this just to be nice to the Europeans so they could all. You wonder why all the Europeans in the newspapers were endorsing Biden, and the New York Times and the Washington Post would say, well, all the Europeans really like Biden. They don't like Trump. We should care what the Europeans think. Well, one of the reasons they liked him was that he was very weak and he was willing to give them things for nothing. While they didn't pay for NATO, they'd be taxing us in new and different ways. And this threat of 899, which was going to be part of the Big Beautiful Bill, was set to come out if they would agree to fixing the two pillars, breaking down the two pillars. Who's the guy who broke the pillars? Samson. But this is, I know some references. It's just not a football reference. If this sticks, this is really, really good news, because retaliatory tariffs to punish somebody hurt Americans by raising prices here. but retaliatory tariffs threatened to get something, and then you don't have the retaliatory tariff and you get what you were trying to get. That's pretty good. And hopefully that good news will remain good news. Although, as we're going to have to warn you repeatedly today, everything's a jump ball, but it looks good.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I think you have the best of both worlds here, where you have the threat of the retaliatory tax itself leading up for an opportunity to reset negotiations with the Europeans and the OECD countries on a deal here, a deal struck by the Trump administration, not the Biden administration. And I love your point about, if I can recall correctly, not letting the Europeans tax us was a pretty foundational part of our country. I don't know why the Biden administration was voluntarily putting us in agreement where our tax policy could be dictated by Paris and Brussels. So great to see.
When Britain did that, we started shooting at them.
Right.
And our troops are already over at NATO, so if they try this again.
So I think it's a great thing here that we're seeing.
Surprise, we're right behind you.
Yes. That we're seeing.
Stop stealing our stuff.
So good news for taxpayers that we're not going to be, we're going to have a renegotiation with OECD here is what it looks like. We'll have new details on the deal coming out soon. But from what Congress knows so far and what the Trump Treasury Secretary is saying, it sounds like it's enough that they're not going to move forward with the retaliatory tax as part of the tax bill. Now, that does open up a bit of a question about whether or not some things have to come out of the bill, whether or not they have to go find new tax increases in the bill to offset some of the other stuff in this. So that's a little thing.
Or cut spending.
So one of the things we had been hearing good news about that had not originally been in the Senate's version of the bill was the House's HSA provisions, health saving accounts. But we had been hearing good news that health saving accounts were potentially on their way back in, some reporting around that.
That the White House wanted them to be in. And the other piece of the interesting news there is everyone in the Senate that we checked with said, oh, we like HSAs. But somehow it just didn't fit into the package and wasn't small enough to fit in the sandbox. So
waiting for rulings from the parliamentarian about other provisions to see what room they had to add HSA provisions back in. But let's back up first, Grover. Can you just tell us a little bit about health saving accounts, why they're good for Americans?
Well, health savings accounts are like IRAs, individual retirement accounts, or 401ks that allow you to save money, build up interest, and use it for healthcare. It allows you can work. We have health savings accounts at Americans for Tax Reform that ATR puts some money into it, and then you pay, you can pay directly from there, and then it's insurance after several $1,000s. But what it does is it makes you the buyer, and it actually helps bid down healthcare costs, reduces healthcare costs, and it allows people to save, because if you save money in what you're buying, then you have more money available for challenges in the future. So it's extremely helpful. There are about 60 million Americans who have health savings accounts. That may be a low number. And this would extend it to another 22 million. So the more people have health savings accounts, the more we have a competitive marketplace for some parts of, not the emergencies like heart attack, but for day-to-day healthcare. And that keeps costs down and has over time.
And I think what's so important here, too, for conservatives' long-term goals, right? If you're ever going to do anything to meaningfully reform Medicare, for example, what you need to be doing is you have people less reliant on government for healthcare. Letting people keep more of their own money, having it invested in HSA and available to spend on their health needs is how you do that. And I don't think we've had a real opportunity to expand HSA since we've implemented them until now. So having it in the House version, I think, was such a huge deal. And the bang for your buck here, I think it scored around $40 billion over 10 years, in the context of which we know Democrats' number one attack on this bill is going to be the Medicaid reforms.
Yep.
And the lie that you're stripping people of health care when all you're really doing is implementing work requirements for able-bodied adults. But when you know that attack line is going to be repeated willingly by the media, why you would not want HSAs included in this bill to be able to turn around and say, that's a lie. We're actually expanding healthcare for 22 million Americans with expanded HSAs.
And expanding your HSAs for the 60 million that have them. So it's a lot of people who benefit from stronger, better health savings accounts. And the Ds are opposed to that because they don't want you in control of this. Sometimes there are many tax cuts in this package, and sometimes people say, well, why do you like one or another? I would argue that in addition to all tax cuts are good tax cuts, what Mae West said about sex is true about tax cuts. All tax cuts are good tax cuts. Even the bad tax cuts are good tax cuts. Work that out at home for yourself. Some tax cuts are better. Tax cuts that give you economic growth make people wealthier. And if you cut taxes on certain products, like an excise tax, might not make you go out and work harder. But reducing taxes on savings and investment does make you save more and invest more. Reducing taxes on marginal tax rates on income makes people decide to work on Saturdays rather than not. But there's another one, which is some tax cuts lead to other tax reductions or spending reductions, and more health savings accounts, more people with health savings accounts reduces the number of people dependent on government and increases the demand for further and further health savings accounts, just as individual retirement accounts, 401ks. Once people had them, they wanted them bigger. They wanted more. They wanted them available to more people, all of which make more self-sustained people and families who aren't dependent on the government or even their corporate retirement. They own their retirement in a 401k or an IRA. The company going bankrupt doesn't get in the way. It doesn't take their pension out, which it would for others or for government. Some tax cuts lead to further reforms and tax cuts. Health savings accounts are in that category.
And I think it also has the added political benefit in this moment in trying to get to a tax deal. In the Senate, we've had Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina has done lots of great work on HSAs.
Yes.
I think it's been probably the main one pushing for this to be included. But on the House side, politically interesting is you have Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, who has been the main lead on this. So it might help bridge a gap between some of the Freedom Caucus members who have been raising issues with the bill. What they've publicly been stating they want back in the bill has been HSAs. So I think it has that political benefit right now of kind of bridging different factions of the Republican Party to come together on this bill.
Good news is nobody is against expanding HSAs. It just competes with other tax cuts.
And as we were mentioning before, while good news by itself that we're reopening up the international taxes with the OECD, we're going to have the opportunity to renegotiate that with President Trump in office rather than Biden. In the immediate moment, there are some question marks about what that means on the tax bill and how it impacts other provisions. I hope HSAs is one of the ones Republicans are able to prioritize.
Absolutely. What else we got that people should be aware of?
Well, let's just do a quick reminder here that if you're enjoying the conversation, take a moment to please rate and review Leave Us Alone on your favorite podcast platform. It helps us reach more listeners who care about freedom. And don't forget to share this episode with friends who value liberty. Now back to the discussion. So
Okay,
two of the other remaining major items here, which again, I believe we're getting some breaking news as we're sitting here recording, will be what the SALT deal looks like, the state and local tax deductibility. We, of course, have about a very narrow House majority, where I think it's currently at a 3-seat majority, and we have 5 members from New York and California and New Jersey who this is a big political deal for them, and they've made that very clear. What the House passed was a $40,000 cap, a very large number, on their ability to deduct SALT. Currently, under current law, we have a $10,000 SALT cap that expires at the end of this year. We're getting a little bit of a sense that these folks are more interested at the moment about lowering the income number for this. But Grover, if you can just give us a little background on what SALT is and what we're looking at in the current moment.
Back in 1986, when the Democrats were willing to get rid of deductions and credits to reduce rates because they saw the success that Reagan had in the 81 tax bill, they were willing to actually, and many Democrats voted for taking the top rate down from 50% down to 28. And there were 2 rates, 15 and 28. Got rid of a lot of deductions and credits. There was one deduction credit that the left said, line in sand, we will not give up any of this. It wasn't the deductibility of union dues, which might have been something they wanted, but they gave us that. It was, in fact, the deductibility of state and local taxes, your property taxes and your income taxes. If you are in a high-tax city, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, New York, where the property taxes are very high, and a state like New York or California, where the income taxes are very high, state income tax. Remember, 8 states have no state income taxes. Many states have lower property taxes than New York, New Jersey, and so on. the deductibility of state and local taxes is not that big a deal in Florida or in most states, but it is a big deal for rich people who have high incomes and pay high rates at the state level income tax and have big houses and pay high property taxes. And the Democrats like to be able to say to voters, we're raising your property taxes, but remember, for a lot of you, because you pay federal income taxes, if we didn't steal your money, the feds would take a bunch of it in taxes anyway. So really, there's a discount here. We're really only, a quarter of what we're taxing would be taken by the federal government anyway. And don't cut taxes, because if we cut taxes, your income goes up and the feds will take, a third of it. How about that? So they literally use this as an argument against tax cuts at the local level and for tax increases being not as painful as you think they're going to be. And that was the law of the land until the Trump tax cuts, which said you can only deduct $10,000, which for most Americans covers them and they don't end up paying.
And they did this while cutting individual rates, crucially,
Yes.
too.
And they took the rates down. What they needed to do was take the top rate down even further so that it wouldn't have this exaggerated effort on high-income people in.
And this is Senator Ted
cities.
Cruz's argument, which I think he gets exactly right, is that the biggest mistake we made in 2017 with TCJA was we should have cut the top rate in individual rates low enough to where SALT didn't matter for anyone.
And we still can do this down the road. I think we should go back to getting rid of state and local tax deductibility, period, by taking the rates down so that it's not as big a deal. It's not and it's simpler. It's not a big deal. And you don't want to discriminate between states. Right now, we have the red states subsidizing the blue states on their high taxes. And we don't want to encourage New York City and New York State to continue to loot New Yorkers a lot, and then argue, oh, but it's all tax deductible. So they'll allow some of it to be tax deductible, maybe more than 10,000, maybe less than 40,000. It'll be a negotiation between 10 and 40. I thought we had a deal last time at 10 for individuals and 20 for married couples. That's where the SALT Republicans, people from New York, California, congressmen, they were happy with that. But as it got elevated, it's a bigger issue in people's minds than it perhaps is in reality. But that doesn't help you if you're up for election.
I think what's a pretty interesting tell from what we know with these negotiations right now is that what's more important to the SALT members is they want the higher SALT cap number while showing some willingness to negotiate on a lower income phase out level, which shows to me that what they really care about here is property taxes for people. So, for example, at $500,000, where the House passed it, where the phase out for your SALT deductibility begins to start, that means that's a couple earning $500,000 in New York, for example. They're paying about $29,000 in state income taxes. So you're covering their entire state income gap while leaving another $11,000 for property taxes. But their willingness to push out that phase down number shows, I think, primarily politically what's driving this are high property taxes in these states. We've always been pushing something like cap gains indexing, Grover, that I think would help with the same problem. Can you tell us a little bit about how we can approach, I think, the same problem with better
We've
policy?
talked to some of the SALT Republicans and leadership in Congress about an idea that's be coming soon to a house near you, where the president, by executive order, would index capital gains taxes, the cost basis for capital gains. So when you look to sell your house or land or a small business, you might have gained, 300,000, but perhaps 100,000 of that is inflation. Or if you lived through a 25-year period where 20% increase in inflation, thank you, Biden, plus 2% a year for 25 years, that would be about 60% of the increase in the value of your house or your land or a small business would all be inflation. And you pay taxes on that right now. But by saying we're not going to tax the inflation, that's a 60% cut in the capital gains tax for people looking to sell their houses and move to another state or move to a smaller house or give their houses to their kids. All of these things become much easier. It's a huge, huge tax cuts for homeowners. And doing that will override for most people anything that comes as a cost in getting rid of or reducing state local tax deductibility of state and local taxes.
And I think importantly there too, if you're doing cap gains indexing rather than SALT, which I think solves a lot of the same political problems, what you're not doing is you're not subsidizing the expensive governments of blue state. You're not, if we're raising SALT, I think that it makes it more difficult for groups like ATR to go into these states and push lower income taxes.
And for all the Democrats in blue states listening to us now, you can fix this problem all by your lonesome. If you are in New York City, elect a mayor who cuts your property taxes. That solves the problem. Elect a governor and a state legislature that cuts your income taxes. That solves your problem. And get 2 senators from the state and a bunch of congressmen from the state who will help us cut the personal income tax top rate. In Washington, you do those 3 things, New York, California, you could do that. We could have all this happen, and you wouldn't even notice state and local tax deductibility because the federal tax would be lower and your state and local taxes would be lower. That's your decision. You do that. No red state makes you do stupid.
A very timely message given the fact that Democrats have just nominated an outright Bolshevik as their mayoral candidate in New York City.
Yes, the second option is move.
All right. So I think one of the other areas where we're dealing with the tax bill, again, to wrap up SALT, to put a pin in it, it sounds like in real time they're reaching some sort of deal. We'll see where leadership lands on that. If it's something that can get past both the House and Senate. The Senate has been pretty firm so far in not raising the SALT cap, but it sounds like a deal is imminent here. But Grover, one of the areas where we think, one, they have to prioritize, nothing that should be retracted from what's currently in the bill, is permanency for the most pro-growth parts of the Trump tax cuts. These are the expensing provisions, allowing for capital investment for businesses, giving them certainty, allowing them to reinvest in themselves, to hire more workers, give their existing workers higher wages, leading to higher take-home pay. A new study out from the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House, led by Kevin Hassett, just put out yesterday, showing that these provisions alone over the 10-year window can increase wages by $9,500 for American households.
$9,500 over a 10-year
over
period.
a 10-year period.
Okay.
Massive importance for
Is that the average person? The average
for
earner?
average household,
Average household?
earning a median income.
Okay. That's worth having. I said earlier, when you're picking your tax cuts, pick the ones that give you growth, pick the ones that give you change the state of play so that further tax reduction and further spending reduction is easier to get. One of the ways you do that is you do things that are so pro-growth that you win the next election. And the Trump tax cut in 2017 was really good, but we refer to it as the Trump tax cut of 2017 because that's when they introduced it, but it didn't take effect until 2018 because instead of being ready to go on July 4th, it didn't get signed into law until December 22nd, and it didn't take effect until January 1st, 2018. So, and it takes a while for companies that got corporate income taxes to invest in new plant and equipment, to buy a new truck, a better piece of equipment, that'll have better computers that make you more productive, that get you paid more. It's not like they take the tax cut and they hand it to you. They take the tax cut, they buy a better computer for you, you become more productive, and then every year you're more productive. And over 10 years, you're making, almost $10,000 additional just from the growth in the tax cut, never mind in whatever else you accomplish in your life. So we really need permanency so that in 2 years, or almost 1.5 years now, when we go into 2026 House and Senate election, Republicans hold the House and strengthen, hold the Senate and strengthen, and then the next tax cut becomes easier.
And to your point, Grover, about the 2017 tax cuts, which again didn't really happen until 2018. In 2019, we had 6.8% average wage growth for households. That was more wage growth than the entirety of the Obama administration in 1 year.
Right.
But politically, to your point,
2019 was a very nice year, but it was after we got creamed in the House and Senate.
There you go. After we
in
lost
2018.
about 40 House seats, I believe.
Yes.
So crucially here, what's so important that the Senate gets right, that President Trump understands and is on board with, is that you have to make these provisions retroactive. So they're starting at the beginning of this year, 2025. So the provisions begin in January, which is so crucial because Businesses will have the certainty and be able to take advantage of the lower taxes now this year and get more money in their workers' pockets immediately.
And the president has said all the way along, this is going to be retroactive to January. But if you're a business person trying to decide to hire a new person or buy a new truck or buy new plant and equipment, expand plant and equipment, you may know that technically it's going to be retroactive, but you're not certain the bill's going to pass. So it makes all the difference in the world that we get it passed now.
Great, Grover. Well, let's get to our regular segment here, which is the government did what, where we highlight something stupid the government was either considering doing or about to do or has done in the past. And thankfully, we have cheerful news today.
Cheerful news.
Where we can talk about something stupid the government was considering but is not happening. And that is the idea of introducing a national car registration fee that was concluded in the House portion of this bill, but is now dead out of the Senate bill. I think this is one of the few bad ideas.
A car tax.
Yeah, I don't know.
You would register your car and pay a tax, not just to your stupid local government and your stupid state government, but to the federal government.
And for anyone who wants to argue that somehow a annually occurring registration fee, because ideally you're registering your car once, but this is an annual fee in quotation marks, look how that would look any different than having a national property tax. So to remind people here, on the House side, originally when this came into the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, there was a $20 fee placed on gas-powered cars, I believe $150 on hybrids and $250 on EVs. The backlash to it immediately was enough to cut out the gas-powered cars, but as Republican congressman and ATR has been making the point, the second Democrats are ever back in power, they were, of course, going to reapply this fee back to gas-powered cars at a higher level, I'm sure.
And increase it. Like, all taxes are put in at as low a level as they can get away with, and then they increase it, and they only hit rich people or bad people or people who smoke or something, and then they take it to everybody.
And I think this is unfortunately to be a case of the federal government not paying attention to what's happening at the state level, because we can look at Republican governors in red states. If you take Governor Youngkin, for example, in Virginia, top priority of his has been repealing Virginia's very stupid car tax. As a former resident of Arlington, Virginia, for example, I know just how dumb their local car tax was. And it's, for a lot of people who aren't familiar with that or come from places where that's not the case, all of a sudden you get a letter in the mail saying you owe your local government $700. And it applies to stupid things like if you're only leasing your car as well, rather than just owning it outright. So very dumb politics at the state level. I think it's a great thing that this is now entirely out of. There's no fee on gas-powered hybrids or electric vehicles included in this bill now.
Sometimes Republicans like districts that are 70% Republican, and you go, oh, well, that will free them up to be very hardcore. It also frees them up to not care what people think. Only somebody in a truly overwhelmingly red district, a Republican, could ever think of something as stupid as a car tax. If you were in a competitive district, you would know not to touch that.
Yeah, and I think this is another area.
We need names and home addresses of the people who thought of this.
So thank you to the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee for dropping this bad idea. Good to see this not included in it, the prevention of a stupid government idea.
This is it for today's episode of Leave Us Alone. Thank you for tuning in. Hey, if you found this discussion valuable, please rate, review, and share the podcast. It helps us reach more freedom-loving listeners. We'll be back next time with more insights on protecting and expanding your liberty. Until then, this is Grover Norquist reminding you to keep fighting to be left alone by the government. Thank you.